Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is a bit out of the ordinary for me, doing an interview with somebody by means of a virtual platform. I'm sure this will probably be the way things go in the future in any case, so good practice. Today I'm here with Liz Falconer in the virtual world called Second Life. Liz, if you want to give us a brief introduction to you, what you do, and a little bit about why people are using platforms like Second Life in blended learning.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much for asking me to do this. Good to be here. It'd be good to be involved in the conference as well. I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah, I'm Liz Falconer. I'm Professor of Technology Enhanced Learning at the University of the West of England, and I'm also the Director of the Education Innovation Centre there. I've been working in virtual worlds for getting on for 10 years now, particularly in relation to their use for education and for practice, and the whole issue around how we can use visual computing and the power of the visual and the immersive, also the auditory and the immersive in terms of education. The kinds of things that virtual worlds get used for, well, I can demonstrate some of those to you in what we do in UE here. We can go for a bit of a walk in a minute. But largely they are things like simulations of situations where the students might find it difficult or unethical or dangerous to carry out some of the practice that they want to practice before they actually qualify. We sometimes use role play where they can act out being different members of different communities, both communities of
Mm,
practice and of patients and so on for medical simulations. So those are the kinds of things that we use them for, and also as meeting places and exploratory places and experimental places. And so there's lots of things that we can do in these environments. So I thought it might be a good idea to show you around here a couple of examples.
sure, let's go.
Fantastic. Okay. So if you'd like to, if you'd like to follow me, then we'll go out through this archway. And I'll just explain as we're walking a little bit about the one we're going to go and see. Which the first one I'm going to take you to is a simulation which our forensic science students use. Our forensic
Right.
science students at UE carry out some practical training and practical examples in an actual house, a real house on one of our campuses in Bristol, and that house is set up as a crime scene. So there's evidence for them to find broken glass and blood stains and so on. And it's a
Hmm.
great opportunity for them to do that practically. So they do this in the physical world, in the real world, um, but of course we can only get two or three students in that building at any one time, and it takes them quite a bit of time to do that. So it's quite restricting on how many students we can get through at any one time. So here in the virtual world, we
Yeah.
have a simulation of two different crimes, both of which are based on real life crimes. Our forensics people work with Avon and Somerset Police. So these are actually based on a couple of local crimes. And here the students can carry out, whoops, here the students can carry out their investigations really whenever they want to. They can come in here at any time. The investigation sites are always there, so they've always got the opportunity to carry out this simulation. And also it enables them to kind of make mistakes. It enables them to get things wrong and go around it and go around it again and do it again, without having to actually set up the scene um, in a physical environment. So these two houses are where the forensics crime scenes occur. The one on the left has a crime inside the house, and that's where someone is found murdered in the upstairs bedroom, and all the evidence is laid out.
Hmm.
The students have to investigate all of that. And the other one is a crime which occurs in a back garden, and that's at the back of one of these two houses. So, because this is controlled by what's called a heads-up display or a HUD, which is, I'll just point to
Hmm.
with the cursor, which is picked up by students from this little machine here. And then once they've got that heads-up display, they have an evidence bag. They can pop evidence into that bag. They can take it with them to the next stage in this simulation, which is a simulated laboratory. And there they can carry out tests on the evidence that they've gathered here if they get the right evidence. If they don't get the right evidence, they can't do the test. They've got to come back, do it again, go back again. And then at the end of those
Right.
tests, they can also teleport on to a law court. And in that court scene, they can be an expert witness with our law students at the university as well, who use what the forensic students are doing as part of their practical and practice-based education as well. So in that way, we
Very
also get the
interesting.
students, we get the students to work together. They work together in groups that they will work together as communities of practice when they qualify, but they can do that while they're actually at university, which is it's a great opportunity. So in order to get into the back garden, and I can show you a bit of how this works, I'm going to have to ask you to fly, Tim. So all you do is press your page up button, and up you go. And then you simply go forwards and then come down in the garden where the shed is. So you just press page down to get down in there. And there we are. Oh, there you go. Good landing.
Wasn't the greatest of landings, I'll be honest.
Good landing. So this is the back garden. This is one of the crime scenes. Students, as I say, come in here with their evidence bags and having been pre-briefed about the outline to the incident, and then they have to look around and find the evidence. They can look in the shed here, and in there are bags of various bits and pieces. There are accelerants in the shed and so on. If we turn around and have a look back here, you can see that there are boot stains on the ground. There are blood spots as well. And so there are even a little gnome. I'm not sure he's got anything much to do with it. So there are all kinds of forms of evidence that the students will need to pick up here. They press the button on that machine at the bottom of the garden, which is another one of those teleport machines, and that's the one that takes them off to the laboratory where they can do their tests if they've got the right evidence and so on. So this is one example. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Let me ask
of
you,
course.
Liz, what are the real benefits of using these kind of environments then?
Well, I mean, there are a number of things that we can do here that it's difficult to do in the physical world. And as I was saying before, one of those things is where something might take a long time to set up, or it might be just impossible really for students to undertake certain activities in the physical world while they're still training. I mean, for example, they can't visit
Yeah.
real crime sites because they can interfere with the evidence. So it's very difficult for them to do live training in these circumstances. Also true of some medical, quite a few in fact, medical simulations as well, where it isn't really safe or ethical to enable the students to interact with people in the real world when they're not yet qualified or not yet trained. So here they can make lots of mistakes. Here they can get it wrong, go around it again, and it's what's called safe space theory in terms of learning theory. The other thing that it's very good at here is what's called situated and contextualized learning, where the learning takes place in the situation. And I'll show you an example next door in a moment of where we've done that as well with accounting students. But the learning takes place in a community of practitioners in the kind of environment that the students will be practicing in. So virtual worlds are really good, or not just virtual worlds, but virtual environments, 3D environments are really good at that kind of simulation, role play, and enabling people to feel what it's like in order to practice in their chosen field.
Can you show us anything else with regards to the way that that some of your students are being trained?
Of course. If we fly back again to the road. Next door is a simulation that we use with our auditing students on our finance and accounting degree. It's a company which has been simulated. It's called Sheridan Audiovisual. One of the issues that came up with the students on the auditing module in their course was how working on financial accounts when they don't have any real sense of the company that they're working for, so they're working from an entirely theoretical base, they found quite difficult and not as engaging as it could have been. So what we've done here is create a company, made up a company called Sheridan Audiovisual, and that company is the basis for the work that the students do in their their training and in their auditing module. So here, when they're given accounts in their training, here is where it relates to. So they can come in and have a look at this place. I'll show you around the side here. They can come and have a look. In fact, I think we might be able to go in through the front door. Yes, we can. That's okay. So if we go in through the front door of this, I might close others in a minute, but okay. So if we go in through here, you can see go into the kitchen and have a look around. You can see the kinds of facilities that this environment has. And they can therefore get a real proper feel for where the accounts refer to that they've been given to work on. The other thing that we do here is
Sure.
use virtual worlds for another way in which they work very well, which is as a kind of theatre set, almost a TV set. So rather than the students actually meeting members of this company, we've filmed or videoed, as we're doing here, it's called Making Machinima, we've videoed the conversation between an auditor and, say, the head of human resources or the managing director and so on. And then those videos are provided to the students for context in their learning as well. We could do it a different way. We could do it in the way that it would enable students to come in here and talk to people who actually work here. And again, we could do that in two different ways. We could do that so that there are actually real life people behind the avatars, as there are with you and I. We are real life people, our computers. But the other thing we can do is plug in artificial intelligence into the avatars. So rather than have a real person behind them, we can have an AI engine behind them. And in fact, we've done that in other simulations at UWE with things like psychology, where the students have interviewed patients who are actually pre-programmed artificial intelligence agents, and they have to diagnose what's wrong with those agents, what their problem is, and how best to help them. So really lots of opportunities open up for adding in other forms of technology, as well as the visual side of and the auditory side of virtual environments like this.
Great, very interesting.
I suppose what some people ask on occasions is, so if these worlds do all these great things, what don't they do very well, and where doesn't it work? And certainly we've had experience of that as well. These are not panaceas. They're not places where every kind of education works well. Most subjects in some way or other seem to lend themselves quite well to doing some things in these kinds of environments, but there are, I think, if you want something that is tactile, if you need to feel something that is tactile, if you need to smell something, if you need to feel connected, if you want to, particularly if you start now to wear 3D immersive headsets like the Oculus Rift and that kind of headset, then when you look down in those headsets at the moment, you don't see yourself. It's a bit of a detached sort of feeling. However, what is on the horizon now are other technologies, things like what are called haptic devices. And haptic devices are where you wear things on your body and your computer then knows where your body is relative to the environment that you're in. So you could wear an Oculus Rift headset, look down, and you'd see your arms. And in fact, you can buy these quite cheaply now. You can buy bracelets called Myo bracelets from Amazon, which are only a couple of hundred quid, and they will work with the Oculus Rift, or you can get them to work with the Oculus Rift, so that when you look down in your headset, you can actually see your arms and you can see yourself moving in the environment as well, which increases that kind of sense of immersion. And there's also ultrasound is coming along as well as a form of feelable texture. It's quite remarkable, actually. This is very new, but there are some people working, I think it's in Bristol actually, it's one of the Bristol technical companies that are looking at how to create the sensation of resistance through the use of ultrasound. So there's a kind of what looks like a window, a very small window frame that sits on the desk, and ultrasound is being generated within that frame. If you push against what looks like thin air in the center of the frame, you can feel resistance, and that resistance is created by ultrasound. So in the future, we may be able to sculpture ultrasound. And so in an environment like this, I could have a 3D headset on, I could sit down, I could see my arms, I could see a cup in front of me, I could pick it up, my avatar could pick it up, but I could also feel myself that I've got hold of that cup as well, in the physical world. So lots and lots of movement in the technology at the moment, and all these individual bits and pieces of technology are there. It's now a question of how we're going to put all those together and get them all to work together, but it's a really exciting time at the moment.
As much as I'd like to stand outside the toilet with you forever, is there anything else you can show me
Yeah,
in this particular
yeah,
building, for
we can go
example?
over to the warehouse, and I can take you out through the warehouse entrance. And again, this for our auditing students. Oh, not that one. Must be that one. If I can find the right door, I can do it. Demonstrations. Oh, it's in there, yeah. I haven't been in this building for a while, so I've forgotten my way around it. Yeah, so for example, there's a room like this where the auditing students will see on the information that they've got that there's a certain amount of equipment which is not for sale. A certain amount of equipment is kept for demonstration purposes. And of course that has to be audited, because that they have to know what the worth of that is and so on. And so in here they can come in, they can see how many of
Right.
those machines there are, see how many sets of speakers there are, and so on. So that kind of thing is again very useful in that we can set it up for the students for particular scenarios, and it's quite quick and easy to change those scenarios in this environment. Whereas if this was set up in the physical world, you can imagine it would be quite expensive and time consuming to change these environments as quickly as we can here.
So what have student reactions been to this kind of thing? Are there people that think it's kind of a little bit too gamified, a little facile, or what have your reactions been? Presumably you'll have done student surveys into yeah, tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we have evaluated. In fact, we do evaluations every time we use these, because it is new, and we recognise that it's one of these
Hmm.
things that it can be quite easy in a way to sort of get a bit carried away if you become a convert in these environments, and then just end up doing things in here because you think it's a good idea, and it's not necessarily. So we do a lot of evaluation with students. You're absolutely right. Some people are, when they first come in here, some people love it because often they're gamers, or they're used to these kinds of environments, and they like the idea of virtuality and virtual environments. And there are other people who hate these kinds of environments and would never play a computer game, have a real issue about not wanting to get involved in these kinds of environments, and indeed not trusting them. What we have found is that it depends really on how relevant we make what people do here. And if the students feel that it's relevant to their learning, and in all the practical cases that I've shown you so far, it is, and in others that we've done with law students, business and ethics students, accident investigation, with environmental health students, then there are real education reasons for doing it. And I think as long as those are clear, then we tend to find that students are pretty much okay with it. Um, some people also are not used to learning like this, and it feels quite different. Their idea of learning is generally that they would come into a classroom, and that they would listen to what a teacher says more than anything else. Whereas here, what we want them to do is to come
Mm.
in and do things for themselves. And sometimes they find that a little bit challenging, a bit unusual to do that. So, it varies a bit. Overall, have to say that most people's reactions to this, most learners' reactions to this, are certainly positive, and particularly in relation to being able to do things here that it will be difficult for them to do in the physical world, that it would be hard for them to experience in the physical world. And it's interesting, even though they say we know it's fake, they use that word, we know it's a fake environment, which it
Hmm.
is, But even though it's a fake environment, the experience that we have in there is a realistic experience. And so it is useful for, for their future practice.
So Liz, give us a little insight into what you're going to be talking about at the Blended Learning Summit coming
Sure.
up later on this
Sure,
year.
yeah. I'm working on a new project, and not in this virtual world actually. In Second Life, it's in a different one on an OpenSim platform called Kitely. But I'm working on the idea of reconstructed space. What you've seen today is very much about reconstructions of how the world currently is. What I'm interested in these environments is how we can reconstruct spaces in how the world used to be a long time ago, and we've only got vestiges of that left. So I'm reconstructing Avebury Henge in Wiltshire. For people who visited there, then they'll probably know how big that is, and it's almost an entire village inside it. So it's about 340 metres in diameter. It's the biggest stone circle in Europe. It's a massive henge and bank system. Most of the stones aren't there now. Only about 33
Hmm.
out of, well, including the avenues, about 330, but in the henge about 230 stones used to be there, but most of them have been destroyed in the 17th and 18th century, a lot of it due to superstition, and they were deliberately destroyed. So what we can't do today is we can't reconstruct Avebury in the real world. I mean, it's, apart from anything else, it's a prehistoric site, and so we preserve those. But also we can't remove the village and so on. So I'm doing that in the virtual world. I'm doing that initially to work with history and heritage students on our History and Heritage BA degree, to give them the opportunity to investigate these kinds of environments and see how that, whether or not that changes their relationship with the physical world environment, because particularly the heritage students will be working in the heritage industry. They'll be working in preservation and in actually looking at how we're going to manage sites like Avebury and Stonehenge and Windmill Hill and all the ancient sites in the UK. And so how we understand them is a really important issue for those students. So that's what I'm going to be demonstrating at the conference, and also some augmented reality examples as well, where we can get 3D stones to pop out on people's computers and phones and tablet computers, and 3D video as well. There'll be some examples of 3D video there too. So it's really looking at how 3 dimensions and visual, as I say, it all really boils down into visual computing, and how the visual end of computing can start to make a difference to understanding spaces that we can't inhabit now.
Now, Liz, you told us a little bit about where you think the technology is going, etc. But what has the take-up of this kind of thing been for the blended learning landscape thus far? Is this something that is becoming, how widely used is it? Is it going to become more and more widely used in the short term, or will there be resistance?
Well, these are not new technologies now, so they're a good 10 or 12 years old, and what you find is they followed the Gartner hype cycle absolutely perfectly, actually, where they got very hyped at the beginning. Lots of people got into them, lots of activity in education and also in corporate training. And then they peaked a couple of years later, and then people started to get disillusioned with them, and fewer people took part in them, particularly because, unfortunately, Second Life changed the way in which they charged education establishments. They put their prices up, and that did knock a lot of education establishments out. And so they went down into what's called the trough of disillusionment in the Gartner hype cycle, which I love that term. And now what you find is that the virtual worlds are kind of part of a much bigger virtual environments and virtual reality, because everything's starting to kind of blend in a lot more, and virtual reality and virtual worlds are starting to climb out of the trough of disillusionment and get onto what's called the plateau of productivity in the Gartner hype cycle, and that's really where we are now. I think the two things have happened. One is that, say, we've gone through the hype and come out the other end, and people have gone, actually, yes, there is a sustainable use for these. They're not brilliant and they're not dreadful, but there is a sustainable use for them. But the other big thing that's happening, I mentioned before, is the devices, the interaction devices. I think that's probably the thing that's going to make the big difference, because the 3D headset devices are just remarkable. And if anybody's had the chances watching this to use an Oculus Rift, then you'll know just how incredibly immersive that is once you're in a full 3D headset. And so I think it's that mix that I think is probably going to push us on to the next level in these. But a lot of people said, oh, Second Life will die out, virtual worlds will die out, nobody will use them for education. But there is a good, strong, sustained education base in these environments now. And in fact, there are virtual worlds best practice in education conferences every year in Second Life and in other OpenSim and other environments as well. So there's a fairly strong base, I would say, now.
Okay, Liz. Just final question from me. What are you looking to achieve from the conference coming up?
Oh, meeting people and getting ideas and throwing out ideas and having people come back with theirs. And it really is very much a conversation at the moment. I mean, that nobody is an expert in these environments because they are, even though they're 10 years old, they're still relatively new in relation to education. And we're still finding out what we can do in here. And I just love the opportunity to meet up with people, to find out what they're doing, to get ideas. These really are community, and that's one of the things that virtual worlds do well because they are social spaces. The education communities in them do work very well, and I like the opportunity to open up those communities to people who may not have thought about these kinds of environments before, but often come back with really brilliant ideas about what we might do next. So for me, it's the conversations, it's the networking, it's ideas generation. That's the real interest for me.
Okay, well, Liz, thanks very much for showing us around your part of this virtual world, and looking forward to meeting you in the real world coming up later on this
Fantastic,
year.
me too. Thanks a lot, Tim.